The Hangout is live.
Alrighty. Well, hello. This is Justin West, and welcome to what is essentially the inaugural post in Heal the Stress, Lose the Weight, a Christian approach to whole person health. I say inaugural. I have with me today Dr. Stanley Lang, who's been practicing medicine for well over 30 years and has a very vast source of knowledge when it comes to whole person health. And we've actually been talking for a few weeks now about his regular daily podcast that he does on his Google Plus channel, and he introduces a lot of really interesting topics. And so we wanted to make this a little bit more formal of a hangout or of a podcast, so we can kind of start to build on what he's been doing. So, Dr. Lang, thank you for joining me today for this big inaugural podcast. Right? Thanks for coming.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
Alrighty. Well, this week on your podcast that you were doing, you introduced a lot of concepts, and I think it's really good for us in this inaugural post, right, to cover some of the basics first. So, can you tell me what is chronic stress? Can you give me kind of your working definition of chronic stress and how it differentiates between how we differentiate between chronic stress and say acute stress?
Yeah, chronic stress is it's actually something that has some technical medical definitions. You can talk about chronic stress and how it is in the body. What I'm going to do instead of getting into that is to more talk about chronic stress in the way that we experience it. So when I was in medical school, I came across a model that was called the expectation reality gap, and it made a lot of sense then, and it still does now when I think about chronic stress, because each one of us has this series of things that we would like to have in reality the way it is, and if that gap is big and I'm focused on the gap, we experience that as stressful. If the gap is narrow or I'm not focused on the gap, the stress is minimal. So chronic stress is basically at least one major situation in my life where I've got this big gap between where I want to be and where life is happening. And especially if I'm focused on that, meaning my eyes, my heart, my concentration habitually or much of the day is focused on that, then I am experiencing chronic stress. So one of the stories that I tell in the first video this week is a way to differentiate how chronic stress feels versus acute stress. So acute stress would be like you're out taking a walk or a jog in the park, and all of a sudden this huge dog starts chasing you, and you fear for your life. You're running as fast as you can, and you know that you don't have much time, and you thankfully find a tree. You jump up the tree, you climb up the tree, and you're just out of reach of the dog being able to grab you, but he can't grab you. So you realize as your heart's pounding and you're starting to catch your breath that you're safe. And then the owner comes up, drags the dog away, and then you are safe. You get down from the tree and you go on your merry way. Now you're going to kind of remember that event, but it's over with in your mind. So chronic stress would be that you have to go by this house every day, and you know this dog is going to chase you, and it's going to chase you for at least a block before the owner catches it. And you're going to fear for your life every day, and you can't get away. It's the only way you can go. And if you can imagine this day after day, you know it's going to happen, you know it's going to happen, it happens. The dog's chasing you, you're running for your life. And how would that feel by day 30? How would that feel by day 180? And how that would feel is what we call chronic stress. So if you can imagine that situation, that's what chronic stress feels like. And so a lot of people are in a work situation that feels like that. A lot of people are in relationship situations that feel like that. Or they have a health problem that feels like that. They can't get away from their pain or whatever their suffering is. And so that's what chronic stress feels like. So there is a difference between where I want to be and where it is, and it's a big difference, and that difference there's no solution, apparent solution to making the gap go away. So that's chronic stress, and it does things to us that are negative. So the focus of this week was to start to introduce people to how we can take steps to decrease the negative effects of chronic stress on my body.
Okay, so would you say then? I'm trying to picture the dog analogy here. Would you say that the chief difference between chronic stress and acute stress is just the duration of the stress, or is it the intensity of the stress, or is it both? Is you know in the analogy you gave? In my head, I'm picturing the dog chasing you as acute stress. It's an intense situation because it's very, very short, or it's very, very immediate, and you have to get away. But then you get up the tree, and you're safe, and it's done, and it's over. As opposed to you walk by the yard where the dog is, but maybe the dog is contained, but he's still a source of stress. Would you say that chronic stress is sometimes less intense but longer lasting, or can it be equally intense as acute stress?
Well, generally, it's not as intense as acute stress, although it carries its own type of intensity that that it just feels different. And when you have chronic stress, you basically are experiencing this sensation more or less all of the time, or most of the time, unless you can figure out some ways to get away from it, so to speak. So acute stress is actually physiologically good. We have this ability to respond suddenly to situations that require us to move faster, to lift things in a superhuman way, and it's associated with a release of chemicals inside of our body that help us to do these things. But the system was designed to be only on for a short amount of time. And what happens with chronic stress is that that system is on all of the time. Well, it can't be on at that force all of the time, so the body makes some adaptations, and so you can't have this huge level of adrenaline on all the time. So the body adapts to it being a lot higher than normal, but it's still it's not as high as it is during acute stress, but it's way more than it should be if I was totally relaxed. And then as that situation continues, another powerful hormone called cortisol starts to increase, and it has its own set of really negative consequences, which we see in acute stress. Chronic stress also releases cortisol, but then it drops down rapidly. With acute stress, there's this release of cortisol, then it drops down rapidly. And chronic stress, it just keeps inching up more and more, and has a series of negative things that it does to my body and my mind.
Gotcha. So what kind of things does it do? How do I know if I'm suffering from chronic stress? I mean, is it just a general sense of anxiety, or are there other physiological symptoms? How does one self-diagnose?
Well, if you have a blood pressure cuff, people under chronic stress often have higher blood pressures, and so if you see your blood pressure creeping up and you feel nervous all the time, that's a very strong sign that you're under chronic stress. Weight gain without eating any differently is often a sign of chronic stress, because the hormonal changes are pushing you in the direction of fat storage chemistry. Your heart beating faster than it used to, your heart palpitating more, that means skipping beats more than it used to, would be another sign. Just not sleeping well could be a sign of chronic stress. Waking up frequently, a sign of stress. Being short with your family members, in other words, getting angry easily when you didn't used to, or something setting you off that you look back and then say, now that shouldn't have happened, or that shouldn't have made me so upset. Those would be all kind of signals that you're under chronic stress. But most people feel this sort of low-grade anxiety, and they have also kind of lost the zest for life. It's just not as fun anymore. It's not as exciting to do the things that I used to do and really enjoy.
Okay, so that being the case, it seems, I guess, maybe it's kind of an obvious question, but why should we really want to treat chronic stress? Why not just put up with it, right? Isn't it, everyone has a little bit of stress in their life, and it's just something we have to accept. Why should we want to treat stress, chronic stress?
Yeah, one of the things that you could say that God set our body up with is ways to let us know when things are not in balance. And so the ways that we know that things are in balance are with different kind of sensors. So if I put my hand on something hot and it burns my hand, I know that's harmful for me. And if I do something else that causes pain or something that causes a sudden discomfort, those are real easy signals to know I should stop doing that. It's such a powerful discomfort that that I don't have to talk myself into getting out of that situation. With chronic stress, it may indeed be hard to see why I should try to get out of this, because I'm often doing something that has a good goal as the result, and so even though I'm experiencing this stress, I may not feel much of a need to get out of the situation because I desire the thing that I'm accomplishing, or whatever I'm doing, the work that I'm doing is going to lead to something that I want, and so I may not have much of a desire at all to get out of that situation. Hence the deadliness of chronic stress. We can stay in it for a long time, and it has so many negative consequences that we're letting it all happen to us without realizing how bad the consequences are. So I can detail some of those consequences now if you'd like.
Well, my next question was actually going to be, can you tell us a little bit more of some of the consequences that somebody might face if they decide to not manage or treat their chronic stress? What kind of things could they be looking at?
Well, one of the things that happens with chronic stress is because of multiple hormonal changes, like I mentioned, cortisol levels going up gradually, and other things that are related to that, the immune system is actually made to be less robust. It doesn't respond as well to the stresses that are before me, such as infection. It doesn't respond to cancer cells as robustly, so I may not be as good at keeping cancer from developing in my body. It also is associated with a lot more inflammation in the body. There are many, even though there's more cortisol in the body, which there's more cortisol molecules in the body, which technically helps to decrease inflammation, there's so much more going on that's increasing inflammation that it puts me at risk for a lot of different diseases, like a heart attack happening, or increased risk for stroke. So if you can think of any of the chronic diseases that we are plagued with in our society, all of those are more common if one is under chronic stress and not doing anything about it. So the thesis for, or the idea behind some of the things I shared this week was that I'm making the assumption with the sharings this week that I'm in a stressful situation and I can't get out of it. So what do I do about that situation? If I can't change where I'm at, and I know where I need to be, and that gap isn't going to change, what can I do about that?
Gotcha. Well, I know that you shared some strategies this week on your hangout that you do, and so I thought maybe we could take some time and just touch over those. I know on Monday you talked kind of about a physical approach to chronic stress relief. On Tuesday, I think you talked about an emotional approach. On Wednesday, a spiritual approach, and then on Thursday, yesterday, you talked about if I could say, familial approach, or approach that involves the family. I think these are four very important aspects of our lives. I mean, everybody has those aspects of their life in some way or another, and those are all the things that are the most important to us. So maybe we can start on Monday and work our way through. Can you tell us a little bit about what you talked about on Monday as far as a physical approach to treating chronic stress?
Sure. And what else I'd like to say is that on each one of these days, I'm trying to just bring up one thing of many that can be said in each one of these areas. So the one thing that I focused on Monday with physical health was the role of exercise in decreasing chronic stress. And the way that it does that, moderate exercise, is at multiple levels. First of all, when I'm in the midst of exercise, particularly if I do it outside where I'm around nature, it literally takes my mind off of that stressful circumstance. Remember, it's not the gap between where I want to be and where I am so much as my focusing on the gap that is the stressful response. So I may be in the midst of this big gap, but if I'm not focused on it, it doesn't stress me out as much. And so when I take this nice, vigorous 30-minute walk and I'm looking at nature and I'm surrounded by nature, that actually pulls me away from focusing on the gap, and that alone decreases my stress. It's like a mini vacation from the stress, which is one of the trying to take mini vacations from the stress is one of the strategies that I teach for all of these different ways of approaching stress reduction. The second thing is that when you do exercise regularly, there are hormones that are released that actually help to bring balance back into the imbalance in my body that chronic stress causes. So those hormones include hormones in the brain that make me actually feel happier. So I will feel happier, more peaceful as a result of having spent this time exercise. So the focus on Monday was simply getting committed to a 30-minute vigorous walk. I usually recommend one that starts at your front door and ends there, because statistically that's the most likely to be sustained by somebody. If you have to go somewhere to even start the exercise, you're less likely to get into exercise because there'll be obstacles and
it's a hassle.
Right.
Now, how long should these this mini vacation, you say, be? You know, some people get 2 or 3 vacation weeks a year, right? I'm guessing you're talking about something more in the hour, half-hour range. How much time would you recommend for this little break in your day? Is 10 minutes enough? Does it need to be half an hour?
Well, I recommend a 30-minute vigorous walk as if walking is going to be the exercise. Now, we could spend a different day a lot more attention to the various options when it comes to exercise and stress reduction. But let's assume that the exercise is going to be just a vigorous walk, and not one that's necessarily breathtaking, just more than just a stroll. It takes about that long to start to get some of the brain chemistry changes that we're talking about. So if you go out and you push yourself hard for 10 minutes and then you stop, you're not going to get nearly the brain chemistry changes that you get with a 30-minute walk. So I do recommend that length of time for this so-called mini vacation that you give yourself when you take that vigorous walk. Would a longer walk be better? Sure, in terms of these principles, but 30 minutes is long enough to get a lot of the benefit from the taking my mind off the focus of the expectation reality gap, and at the same time inducing some of the chemical changes in the brain that just make me feel happier.
So like 10 jumping jacks isn't going to cut it, right?
Well, 10 jumping jacks is a whole lot better than nothing. And so if you've been parked in your chair for 3 hours and you get up and do 10 jumping jacks, I guarantee you'll feel better. And it would be great for you to do that. It'd be great to do that every 30 minutes, but not nearly as powerful as a 30-minute walk, no.
Fair enough. Okay, so is that kind of wrap up what you'd say about the physical approach, or do
well, in terms of trying to cover the various things that we're going to try to squeeze into this one time, yeah, I think there's probably enough time spent on that.
Alrighty. As a reminder, if you're watching this as a video, we also will be sending this out as a podcast, but you can click the subscribe button down below and follow along with Dr. Lang pretty much every day as he releases some of these really great bits of wisdom. So anyway, on Tuesday, you talked about emotional health and an emotional approach to reducing and treating chronic stress. Can you tell us a little bit more about that emotional approach that involves relationship?
Yeah, well, one of the most powerful things that we can do to deal with chronic stress is to work on a regular basis to build up our own emotional health. And there are several different areas that we can work on that if we invest time in these different areas, we will build up the stability of our body to withstand stress. And these areas include family relationships. And so what I talked about on Tuesday was the benefit of investing in at least one close family relationship on a daily basis. And the emphasis was on investing to build the relationship, and I tried to differentiate that from cruising in a relationship. So I think all of us kind of know the difference between cruising and investing. Another way of saying it is we take each other for granted pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be around somebody a lot and not build the relationship at all, just because you're together doesn't necessarily build a relationship. And so while being together, even if you're not building the relationship, is a good thing, it doesn't put anything into your emotional bank account. So when you are investing in the other person, you're investing to build them up, it puts something into your emotional bank account that makes you more stable emotionally when you are being affected by chronic stress. And so the idea that I was talking about on Tuesday was to daily invest in at least one family relationship. And it doesn't have to be a long period of time. It's more like what your intention is, what you're doing with that person that is giving to them with the purpose of building the relationship rather than what can I get out of this relationship.
I will say one thing I actually started doing this week. I've definitely been under stress here and there, certainly, and sometimes I find my relationship with my kids strained a little bit. As you know, I have 4 of them, 3 of them at the age in which they could be disobedient, and I found myself having to correct them a lot this week, which was really tough. So I made a conscious effort the other day I called each one of them over one at a time, and I just gave them a hug. I just said, "Come here, come sit with me, and just give me a hug from them." Didn't ask anything of them, didn't do anything of them. I just gave them a hug. And I think that physical touch is, of course, very important. I'm sure at some point we'll talk more about that as well, as far as stress reduction. But I think it kind of applies to what you're saying. It was just taking a minute and investing time with them and getting nothing, expecting nothing in return, but the action itself or the activity itself is just taking that time.
Right. Yeah, that's a perfect example of investing in the relationship, and a perfect example of an investment that didn't take much time. But you consciously chose to give to that person, and that was the huge thing. And the paradox of it is that God gives back to you way more. I mean, you gain so much more from it than you gave. But what you gave was still very valuable, and I'm sure your kids really cherished the moment and got a lot out of it. But what God gave back to you was more than you gave out. And that's, in a sense, what I'm talking about. We're investing in the relationship, and we don't do it so that we can get something back, but we do it knowing that invariably we get something back in that makes us stronger emotionally.
Well, speaking of relationships, and especially relationship with God, I know on Wednesday you discussed an approach that involves our relationship with God. Why is God important when it comes to chronic stress, right? And what would you recommend, or what did you recommend on Wednesday?
Well, this week I was using this week as a way to kind of introduce a new set of topics from what I've been talking about the last several months. And so the idea of holistic, or whole person health, being health of body, mind, and spirit, how spiritual health happens is a much more mysterious thing, and certainly there's no broad agreement on what that even means. So I wasn't attempting to answer the question of what that means for everybody's that everybody could agree on, but at least something that most people would agree on if they have an opinion about the value of spiritual health at all. And so what I wanted to do was to focus on just the basic idea of approaching God as I just talked about with a family relationship, which is to invest in the relationship, to see it as a relationship, and to make the choice to invest in the relationship with God as a very powerful way to decrease stress in my life. And again, we don't want to do something like that because of what I think I'm going to get out of it. That you lose the energy of it all when you do that. But knowing that's how we're put together, there is value in knowing these things, because you start to become aware then of how the relationship is working, how God moves back in my direction in the relationship when I know that that's a dynamic of it. So what I was focusing on in this part was to just focus on the idea of being content to be with God rather than trying to ask God for stuff. So most of the time when we are choosing to spend time with God, there's a temptation to spend most of that time telling God how the world should run or asking God for stuff. Rather than just being with
I
Him.
should be God's right hand man. I've got all these great ideas, right? I know how things should go.
Right. More or less. So I was trying to sort of set the stage for spiritual health. Of any future comments over the next few weeks, as the foundation of spiritual health has to be relationship with God, and the foundation for relationship with God, I think, has to be a willingness, indeed a desire to just be with, and nothing else. Just a desire to be with, just for the sake of being with, and for no other reason.
How does somebody experience being with God? I know that for some people it may be a very intuitive concept. For some people it may be very foreign, right? If I've never experienced being with God before, how would I go about doing that?
Well, that would be about a 1-hour answer. So I'm not going to try to answer that in any detail.
But we will on a future episode.
But I will, yeah. In the future, we will talk more about that. But I will share a couple ideas that that may help. So a big part of it is, what is my intention? What do I intend to have happen with this moment? So if I intend to build my relationship with God, then that's the first starting point. I intend to do that. So then the second step to that is time. I spend some time with God. I can't intend to build a relationship if there's no time invested. So then the next step is at least a commitment of some moments. Now the neat thing about God and His relationship with us is that He doesn't require any time. He's good. I mean, a half of a microsecond, is sufficient time for God to do anything He wants to in relationship with me. It's what I need. That is, what do I need to be whole? And that, there's a lot that can be said about that. But spending at least a few moments where I know I've spent the time, enough time that I know I spent some time, that is helpful. So if my intention is to spend enough time, it could be 30 seconds, and that may be enough time that I know I spent some time with God. 5 minutes would be better. More than 5 minutes would be even better. But so the intention then is to spend some time, enough that I know I paused my day. To spend time with God, and then during that time, my whole intention was just to sit with God. I don't expect anything from you, God. I'm just happy to be with you. And if I do that, I've grown the relationship in a profound way, and God will relate back to me in ways that are usually mysterious and wonderful and beyond what I can imagine and expect.
Very cool. Well, that does, in fact, sound a lot like what I was talking about with my kids, only it's now God giving us that hug, right?
That's right.
Just
yeah.
Come spend time with me, and whether it's 5 minutes or 5 seconds. I guess when you're infinite and you're eternal, what's a day versus an hour versus 10,000 years? I guess, right?
Yeah. And that's a great example of you're just calling your child over there and asking him to sit with you, and you didn't have to say anything. You're just there, and that's a good example of being with God. I mean, if you can imagine sitting with a loved one and just being in the same room and being comfortable being with, but you're intentional being with. It's not like you're being with, both of you are reading the newspaper. You're being with each other with the intention of sensing each other's presence. You're just
playing
there.
Angry Birds, right?
Right.
Who reads a newspaper these days? I mean, really.
Sorry about that. Dating myself. But,
what is this newspaper of which you speak? Well, that kind of brings it back to family. I know on Thursday you touched again on family, so let's dive back into that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, on Thursday I could have saved what I talked about on Tuesday for Thursday, but I wanted to introduce the concept of building relationships as a key way of decreasing chronic stress on Tuesday. But on Thursday, I wanted to focus more on the whole concept that our families are entities that can be either healthy or they can be ill. And And my investment in the decision for my family to be healthy is itself life-giving to me. Again, then I have to be focused on, if this is my goal, I'm focused on everybody that's in the family that I can touch. My goal is to help that family be healthy. Now, what happens is, as I invest in that, the more family members that have bought into that idea, the healthier the family will be. And the healthier the family will be, when I'm under stress, when I step into my family space, it's a healing space. It's automatically stress reducing. Now, for a lot of people, unfortunately, they step into their family stress space and they're stepping into more stress. And that's not the way, that's certainly not the way God wants it, and it's not the way it has to be, but it often starts to change by me intending for my family to be healthy. And I'm investing in family so that it can be healthy. And in return, I receive blessings that make me more stable emotionally.
Okay. Well, this has been a really good session here. I feel like we've gotten a really good definition of chronic stress. I like the analogy of the dogs being chased. It's kind of palpable, right? You can kind of feel the anxiety. You can kind of feel it even in your heart. If you really think about it, you really just kind of put yourself in the moment. You can definitely kind of get a sense of that, and I think that it is healthy. I'd love to talk more about some of the various ways that we see stress manifest itself in the future. And definitely we need to talk a lot more about the various ways we can combat stress in our lives as well. But that pretty much sums up the week. Are there any parting words of wisdom, Dr. Lang, that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, again, the purpose for this whole podcast is to focus primarily on the need and the value of a stress reduction lifestyle. We can call it stress management. We can talk about healing the stress, but we actually need to do this if we want to be as healthy as we can be. And I want to just encourage us all to be focused on that. And in the future, we'll talk more about why that helps us be healthier and how it makes us be healthier. But just to sort of accept at face value that dealing with chronic stress in a way that is healing through these different avenues helps in a big way. It's not sort of trivial or marginal. It's huge in terms of its effect on our long-term health, and of course invariably on the health of the people that are around us. So it's a worthy thing to invest in healing the stress in my life, not just so that I can be happier, but to make me a better person, the person I want to be, the person God wants me to be, and to be happy in the process, to be able to enjoy life to the full. That's part of why we want to focus on chronic stress reduction.
I guess you would say the happiness is almost just a natural result of when everything else is in order. And when everything else is in order, the stress goes away and the happiness comes.
I think that's true. I think that it's true to say that our natural state is happiness. If you take little kids, and in general, they're happy. I mean, they have a lot of moments when they're not, when they don't got what they want, when they're in that space of stress where this is what they want and this is where reality is. But when they're not there, yeah, when they're just sort of being themselves, they're happy, and that's our natural state. But we superimpose so many layers of chronic stress that it weighs us down like a wet blanket covers up a fire. And we want to take those things off so that we can be just naturally happy and to be able to enjoy life to the full. There's lots of moments, there's thousands of moments every day that we can enjoy to the full if we're not being distracted or weighed down by chronic stress.
Alrighty. Well, again, this is Justin West, and with me is Dr. Stanley Lang. This has been Heal the Stress, Lose the Weight, a Christian approach to whole person health. To learn more about what Dr. Lang is doing, you can visit www.thewholehealthdoc.com. And Dr. Lang, thank you for meeting with us today, and I'll see you next Friday.
Thank you, and have a good week. God bless.
God bless you.
Bye.